the next thing that we're going to tackle, which we had this question in our Facebook group, I think last week, right? So, the question is, what are things to consider when creating a day of timeline? So we touched on it a little bit, and you've already touched on it a little bit, I feel like, as far as as far as wedding planning anyway, because there's a lot that goes into play when you're doing a timeline. But so what are the things to consider when creating a day of timeline?
I think that's a great question. There's quite a bit. I think there's a few things that really will impact that timeline. Photography being the main one, and determining if the couple is going to do a first look. So if you're not familiar with what a first look is, it's when the couple will see each other before the ceremony. So albeit not as traditional, right, as seeing each other right when you walk down the aisle, it's far more common, nowadays than, in past generations. Right. So it's super common. And it's actually a really cool, intimate moment between because it's just the couple.
Yes.
Seeing each other for the first time and the photographer. So it still packs a punch as a really impactful moment.
It really does.
Were you going to say something?
No, I was, yes, it is. Yeah, and that has a lot to do with the timeline. That is one of the biggest questions, and there's a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, I definitely don't want to see each other. And you said just a second ago that a while ago people really didn't do first looks, but a long time ago your venue and your reception a lot of times were in different locations. Yes. Now, majority of the weddings, your reception and your wedding is at the same. So go ahead.
Yeah, which is super convenient too. So if you do a first look, there's a couple things in how that impacts the timeline. The biggest upside is your photographer can really take 90% of the photos before the ceremony even takes place. So they can do couple portraits, wedding party, family, everyone all together, and then right after the ceremony we can all just flow right into cocktail hour in the reception. So that's the biggest pro of doing a first look. If you don't want to do a first look, that's totally fine too. I mean, there's no right or wrong way.
Right.
The biggest difference if you don't do a first look is your photographer will still take some photos before, right? Mm-hmm. Typically each couple with their wedding party. But we'll definitely need to buffer some time after that ceremony to do a dedicated cocktail hour for at least an hour, maybe hour and a half, depending on what your photographer needs, because you will need a good chunk of time to get the couple portraits done, family, everyone all together.
And you've got wedding parties, so you've got,
people don't think about, it's like, okay, if you've got, each photo takes, a minute, and you've got 50 photos to take. Right.
And I think that I said this last week, but I wanna say it again. If you have 15 family photos on your side, which is not very many. So if you have you, mom and dad, you and mom, you and dad. I mean, obviously everybody's family dynamics are different, but if you only have 15 on each side, and they only take 1 minute apiece, which that's quick.
Yeah, that's.
And I'm not saying some photographers can do it quicker. I'm not saying that, but you want to make sure that you're capturing everything. So there is a lot to take into consideration.
Absolutely. And again, there's no right or wrong way.
So
we just have to tailor the timeline a little bit different, which is totally fine. And for the cocktail, as long as your guests are drinking and eating food, they're happy. We just don't want that gap to be too long, right? The other thing I would take, into consideration, I do my timelines a little bit different. So I like to work from the back to the front. So I would say, one, determine what time you want the party to end.
Right.
So the most common end time for a reception is 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, you've got the majority of your guests still there. You're ending on a high note. Right. You can do a send-off for the couple. And your money's really maximized. I think 11 o'clock is probably the second most common. You're going to lose, a few guests. Midnight, I never recommend for anyone. It's just late. Maybe I'm just old. I'm not fun anymore. Unless it's a New Year's Eve,
right?
Then it's like, okay, people are already planning to stay up and be up till midnight.
And a lot of that has to do with your venue as well, because not only do you have to factor in if you have to be out of your venue by midnight, you can't end it at midnight.
Correct.
You have to give yourself time. So,
and that's really important. As part of a planner, I'm reading through all of those contracts when my couples book their vendors. And so I actually just had one, not too long ago. They had their reception in time at midnight, but that's what time we were contracted to get out of the space, which means everyone's got to be packed up, decor needs to be taken down, guests out. So we
all
have to
your
shift.
Professionals have to be packed up and out too.
Yes, absolutely. So that's why I kind of like to start from the back and then work. Mm-hmm. So if we're 10 o'clock, right, if that's our goal in time, typically a reception is about 4 hours long. I would think that's most common. Right. Plus an extra hour for cocktail hours, so you're looking at 5 hours. I don't recommend going much more than that, because 5 hours of drinking and partying and fun is a lot for most people. And again, you want to end on a high note. Right. And then factor in your ceremony anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, and we just kind of work it backwards from there. The other thing to take into consideration is sunset. Right. We were just talking about the sun being, we're so happy with time change.
Yes, I know.
I love it being
it's so nice.
Outside.
It's light outside.
I know, it's hard not to go outside and walk. But sunset, it's like, are you getting married indoors or outdoors? Mm-hmm. Is your venue all glass? Where's the sun going to be at? And this is where we bring in the photographer, because they're the expert of all things lighting and placement. And so those are really important questions to ask. Do you want to get married at sunset, or do you want your portraits to be done at sunset? Right. So if that's an important factor to you, then we've got to build the timeline kind of around that. Right. And oftentimes that is the case. And so those are really important conversations to have, up front with the photographer, to bring them in and collaborate and say, okay, how do we want to make this work? Right. So I would say those are the key things to really look at when building out that timeline.
Right. And then, it really and truly, your timeline really starts with hair and makeup at the beginning of the day. And if I could give you any advice, and we will have Jillian here in a few weeks, but hair and makeup is incredibly important, but honestly, your timeline of your day sometimes even starts before that. But give yourself enough time. I think one of the things of really looking at a timeline, I had a wedding at one point, and they timed it by the minute. Oh gosh. And I can tell you, just give yourself enough time to be in the moment. I mean, it's like you were saying earlier, the wedding day goes so fast anyway, and if you don't have someone who's helping you with the planning of it, if you don't have that day of coordinator or a wedding planner, or just make sure that you're giving yourself enough time. Don't make it so crazy busy that you can't keep up, because just like you said earlier, a wedding day, not everything goes exactly on time. But I always go back to hair and makeup, because hair and makeup's incredibly important, and it depends on how many people they're going to have doing hair, and how many people are doing makeup, and how many hairdressers and makeup artists that they do have. But so really and truly, the whole timeline, it's a pretty lengthy process, and there's not really any that are the same. I mean, you're taking into so much into consideration, because some families are really big and they want lots of photos, and then some, and one of the other big questions when you're looking at a timeline is, most important, those family photos are important, the wedding party photos are important, but the most important part of the day is just the couple. Right. It's just the couple. And so just, make sure you're giving enough time to, because these are memories. Yes.
I don't do by the minute timelines. And
no one should do by the minute.
A lot of mine are ish, right? So 7:15 ish, because and I tell my couples going into it, we're going to be 5 minutes ahead or 5 minutes behind. It's fine, right? I'm not going to let us get too off track. But you're right, and no timeline is the same. if, sometimes for a couple, they want to be introduced and they immediately want to do the cake cutting to get that photo, and then we take the cake off and we start cutting it.
Right.
Some people walk in immediately and do their first dance. Right? Some people do that later on. I mean, there's so many elements that there's no right or wrong, and it really is tailored to the couple.
Yeah.
For me, I always aim for an hour and a half to 2 hours of unscripted time.
Yes.
I want them to be able to dance and have a cocktail and enjoy it, because if we're working a timeline up until the very end, you will look up and you're like, oh my gosh, what? It's a blur. So I always try to aim with let's get an hour and a half at minimum for you guys to just enjoy, and I'm not pulling you in different directions, having you do things, and it works out really well because they're just able to relax and enjoy their wedding.
Yes.
So they don't look back and they're like, oh my gosh, what happened?
Right.
How is
Because
it
you don't want to be at your wedding and everybody else be enjoying it.
Yeah.
And you not being you're not
absolutely
enjoying it.
Yeah.
So I think that is really such a good idea, and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yes, I love it.
So okay. So do we have any? We have a couple questions. I know we do. So.
Okay, so Aranza asked, how do I get a hotel block, and how far in advance should I look for a hotel? She has quite a few guests coming from out of town.
Such a good question.
It's a great question, and my answer for sure is, as soon as you're thinking about it, go ahead and do that. So what typically I'll do I have a lot of out-of-town couples that come to get married. We'll look at that guest list and say, hey, what percentage of guests are coming in from out of town? That's going to dictate, how many room blocks we need to set up.
Right.
And it's important, to do different price tiers also. So, you're going to have, maybe 2 different options depending on what guests can afford, what they like.
Right.
Also, so I would contact your local hotels, immediately. I always look, placement to venue, right? Obviously, closer is better. If they're driving back and forth, or taking an Uber or a cab, whatever that looks like. A lot of hotels they'll do blocks of 10, and then once you fill those 10, they'll open up another 10. But it's really important to communicate that to your guests too, because there is a cutoff time.
Right.
The guest needs to call, mention the Willinger wedding, you get this special rate. But if you pass that cutoff time, then they rent out those rooms to other people.
Right.
So I would say sooner the better for sure, especially, depending on what's going on in the community. Also, if there's big conferences coming to town or concerts, there's so much to take into consideration. And if you wait and there is something going on, that rate's going to be more expensive, and you're just not going to get the best deal.
Right. That's such a good point. Good job. I love that. And I would not have taken into consideration the 2 as far as price points, and the closeness to your venue. I love that, because that really does help your guest as well.
Yeah, and definitely you'll list that on your wedding website if you have one. List those options. Be very clear about how, they go about booking. There's a specific number, the code they have to say, the rate they're going to get. And then also, Airbnbs, you can also, recommend for guests as well.
Right.
And then also communicate transportation. That's a big one for weddings. If they're not being shuttled from place to place, making it known, Uber's available or cabs available, just so your guests have everything in one spot.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Good question.
Good question. Okay.
From Sydney, she said, are there any things wedding planners do that many of us would never think that they take care of?
So we touched on a lot of that,
Yeah.
I feel like, because there was, for me, you answered a lot of questions. So hopefully you got to see what Misty said in the, because I feel like both of those, day of coordinator and just the wedding planner question, might have touched on some of those, but
I aim to, a lot of it probably comes for, the day of part is to take care of all those little things that pop up that you never will ever know about, right? Like I just step in it and take care of it. So it does kind of add up, but again, it's like less stress for you, the better. But I mean, I have a horror story for my wedding. I've been married 9 years almost, and the venue that I booked, they didn't have, a venue attendant or anybody, and I was so fresh out of college. I was a baby, and this was before, my industry experience. but like the venue didn't have toilet paper. They didn't have trash bags for the trash cans.
Oh my goodness.
Right, like crazy to me.
Right.
Like, why would I ever think about that going
Right.
into
Right.
it? So it's like any of those weird things that pop up, my team just steps in it and block and tackle, and you'll never know at the end of it at all. So.
And I think that's, there are a lot of things that happen on the day of.
Yes.
And the biggest thing is for couples is you don't want to be the one who's running and handling things. You don't
Right.
want to, is the reception done? Is everything decorated? Have the flowers done?
Right.
And I really and truly feel like really you're handling all the details.
Yes.
And there are a lot
Yes.
of details. There are, we touched on it earlier, but there's so much in the wedding planning, and those details are what gets overwhelming. I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
So, and you're handling so much of that. So
That's why I love what I do.
Yes.
Give me all the things and the details and the checklists, and I'm gonna take care of it.
Yes.
I love it.
yes, I love it. So hopefully that helped, and
Yeah.
hopefully that answered that question.
We have our coronavirus question
Okay.
from Maria. She said, when should I be concerned enough to contact my vendors about the coronavirus and their cancellation policies?
Yeah, that's been I was reading articles actually today about that. I've got a couple events in St. Louis that have corporate events but have canceled because a lot of people flying in from different areas. I think in this area, we're not at a stage of panic yet, so I would not suggest making any rash decisions. I think inevitably, you're going to have guests that opt not to attend, especially older folks or young kids, because they're, most at risk for the coronavirus. So I think you can expect that. I do find it very important, if you don't have a planner, to review all those contracts, go back and look at the fine print. A lot of those deposits are non-refundable. Some venues or vendors will transfer those to a new date, some will not. And it all depends on when you're canceling it. Are you canceling it 120 days out, 60 days out, 30 days out? I mean, that all comes into play.
Right.
Canceling a wedding is a massive expense.
And I
rescheduling.
think I want to touch on why, because most couples maybe don't understand why it's such a massive expense. As a wedding professional, as soon as you book a wedding professional, we have blocked out that date.
Right.
So we only have so many months out of the year, honestly, that we are in full wedding season.
Right.
And so, especially for you and a lot of other wedding professionals, you can only do one
Right.
a day.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it's not because wedding professionals don't want to just,
I know, I wish I could take them all. It breaks my heart. I've had to turn away several for 2020. It's very rare that I would do more than one in one weekend. So once that date's booked, I mean, it's all for you.
Right,
you
it's
know.
all booked, most of them don't, unless they can do multiple events on the day, your date's booked.
Yeah.
And however early that is. And so, for me, as far as, the coronavirus, most wedding professionals are gonna be there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're if the concern is what if they don't come, or most wedding professionals, obviously if they haven't or if they've been in contact with it,
Right.
they'll figure something out, or they'll send someone else or whatever the case is, but most wedding professionals that are in this industry care about the couples that they're in it with, and so they're gonna figure out
Yes.
something to make sure you only get this date one time. So and just like you said, if you're planning a wedding and this continues to be might be a good idea to start
Yeah.
looking for, you know, little things of hand sanitizer.
Yeah, we've
or,
seen some fun,
yes.
which we do during flu season anyways, right?
Right.
So, you know, I've seen little personalized hand sanitizers, right, as favors as people walk into the ceremony, listing on your wedding website, hey, if you're not feeling well, stay at home, right? You know,
We're okay with,
we will be
yes.
totally fine, put the gift in the mail. I'm kidding. Maybe not opting out of a receiving line, right? Where your
Yes.
guests line up and you're hugging and kissing everyone, maybe opt not to do that. I would probably recommend that for
Right.
sure. Most of my weddings with, you know, whether it's the flu or the coronavirus. So I think there's little things that we can all do. All of your professionals can come together and tweak a few different things that won't impact the day, you know, in a crazy way, but they're just precautionary things. I think it's very smart. It's a smart question. I think we all need to think about it. Right now in this area, I don't think there's need for panic, but, you know, definitely put in some cute little ideas to try and, you know,
help.
yes,
Yeah.
and keep everyone safe and happy. I mean,
And the most important, be protective of you guys as a couple.
yeah,
Make sure that you guys are washing your hands and doing everything the health
Yeah.
department, because the whole day is around you guys. So just make sure
Everyone's
that
gonna be
you're
loving on
taking
that.
exactly. So
Fist
make sure
bumps.
you're taking you know, this time to if it is a concern for you, that you're taking the extra precautions, because you don't want to be sick on the
Yeah.
wedding day for sure. So
yeah.
so yeah, just, you know, but I think honestly for most wedding professionals, we're gonna figure out a
Yeah.
way. I mean,
Yeah.
it's what we do for a living.
Mhm.
It's, you know, it just is. It's not, there are not too many wedding professionals that call off.
I've never been able to call in sick.
You can't.
No.
You can't. And you know, it is, and that's why we, you know, at Top Weddings, that's why we love wedding professionals, because it is
Yeah.
something that you are committed, and you're committed to that couple, you know, no matter what. So yeah.
Good question.
Okay, that's a great question.
Perfect.
Anything else?
No.
Okay. Anybody? So let me. Sorry. So thank you again for watching live, and thank you, Misty,
Thank
for
you.
being here. And obviously, this video will be posted in the group as well. So if you end up getting to rewatch it, that's awesome too. But thank you for
Thanks
being
for
here. We
having me,
appreciate you
Jen.
so much, and such helpful information today. So thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.